This is trade planning with the askSlim team, from the analysis to the trade idea. This is what we're going to show you today. What we all do is we individually look at our analysis, because we all do a tremendous amount of analysis every single week. And then we look at what pops out at us as what is likely to be a pretty good opportunity. These will generally be points at turns in cyclical patterns, at areas that we see peaks for short side trades, for areas that we see negative stocks that have had consolidations that are likely to turn down again, or the opposite for positive stocks. There's all different variations of what we might see that really pops out at us as an opportunity. And I'm going to show you that right now as I switch over to the chart of Alibaba. What's really interesting about Alibaba is that, well, it's come from $319 all the way down to close to $60. That's over these last 3 years. And you can see this huge downside move. And the Chinese market has gotten annihilated. I want you to see on the bottom, there are cycle brackets. And do not confuse cycle brackets with actual cycles. They are just simply a drawing tool and a guide for us to see where we see repeating patterns in the market. And then how the cycles actually resolve themselves is actually up here on the price chart. And you can see how that there's key important troughs in areas. These lines that you see right over there are showing where the actual troughs came, the actual lows. And this is where the ideal would have been. And that's normally three, 4 bars on either side of where the ideal. And you can see how that works out here. Now, I'm just going to look at these last 3 cycles right over here so you can get an idea where we are. Now, China, as I said, is trying to stimulate their economy because they have huge problems in the real estate market. They have big problems in the stock market, which has really moved down. I'll show you FXI in a moment, just on the weekly chart, so you get an idea. This is really what's significant. You can see these rhythms on these big charts. Remember that when these energies are rising, as you see right here in the stock, the peaks could be anywhere in the cycle. And just because a cycle is coming down, or just because it's rising, you see right over here, it's still rising, but see the stock was falling. This doesn't mean it's going to continue to rise. What we do is get information out of the actual price action to help us, and momentum conditions that you could see right in here have turned down. And this is the askSlim reversal scout that we have here. This is a level 4 indicator right there. And if you want our free indicator for momentum, that would be the slim ribbon. And you can get that. It's on many platforms. So the when it turns up, as you could see right over here, you get into those positive patterns, as it did right over here. And guess what? It didn't turn up here. But we have this engulfing pattern that occurred. In other words, it made a lower low and it's closing above. It's actually engulfing 2 different weekly bars right there. And that tells us that, you know, it's very likely that a bottom is forming right over here. With all the money that's being pumped by China, it's pretty likely that that's going to happen. I have a note here to remind me momentum is negative. So we're anticipating that this is a bottom, and anticipating is okay. And if you're a trader, we always say anticipate with a quarter or a third of a position. You're not going to get into a full position. You're going to want to do that when you have some confirmation in the pattern. So you can see these 2 lines right over here. They tell us that somewhere either side of that ideal low, and there are 1, 2, 3 minor cycles that are very clear, as you could see right in here. Once they trough in here and then move up, you start to get bigger upside moves. And as you see, it happened over here, it really began to accelerate. A couple of weeks, it moved up a little bit and then turned up very sharply. Of course, this move right over here was from 60 to 120. That was a double just in the first part of this cycle right over here. This one over here was from around 77 to around 102. So that was about a, what was that, 45% move. So this could be a big move in here. I mean, 50% from 67 takes you all the way up into the 90s. And you see the resistance there at 90, approximately 89. So this is the beginning likely of a move. Let's look at the daily chart right over here. And the daily chart has a little shift in it. This is we have a lot of people that ask us about this. They see this ghosted out cycle right over here. That was where it was actually making the bottoms. You could see where those troughs came and lined up, but this cycle went pretty long, as you can see. So it creates a shift. And then we put these dotted cycles in there because they help us understand where that shift is. And you see, as you go back, it doesn't make that much difference, right? But there's been an energetic shift, and that often comes when there's a lot of selling and a washout happening. And you can see now, just look at these last few cycles right over here. This is now moving up, and this resistance over here is at 77. This is at 80. And this one at the 78.6 is at 83. So this is likely to move up and then move down and set up a good buy, but not get below this low here at 67. So this is a very good pattern in here. As far as seeing a bottom coming, you could see on the bottom the slim ribbon PO, you see how red it was and those down arrows telling you expect momentum resumptions as it did. It just turned blue right over here. We want it to turn green. We want the slim ribbon to go green and in positive configuration as our first sign that there's actually a momentum shift going on. I'm going to switch over now to the weekly FXI just so that you could see that the energies in China are changing also. Here's that big decline in China as it comes down from 54 right over here all the way down to 20. So that was about a 60-something% loss in China. And look at the cyclical patterns and how they line up. As you could see, the negative momentum that we still have, but still look what happened here where you had that engulfing pattern way back over here, and that is it in October of 22, and how that was the signal, and then the momentum turned up, and then you knew we were off to the races on the upside. The momentum here has not turned up yet. So again, we'll be looking for momentum to turn up in China and specifically on the daily chart first, and then we will know. But right now you have a setup right here of a bottom that is forming. We call this in the bottoming phase of Alibaba. And that means if you are interested in it, you nibble. You just get a toe in there, and that will keep it on the radar for you. And if it's wrong and it goes to lower lows, you don't get hurt by very much. If you start to get confirmations and you add on, then you can really start to hit good size trades without taking big risk. That's my look at Alibaba and China, and I'm going to turn this over to Katie for Nike.
Okay, great. So I'm going to look at analysis in Nike, which suggests a bearish bias. Now, I identified this opportunity by looking at the cycle low timing tracker. Nike is down here in the in sync box. Generally speaking, symbols in this box are expected to show weakness and or suffer breakdowns because the timing of their daily cycles aligns with a period of time on the weekly chart when we expect a low to form. And you'll see what that looks like when we look at the chart. A couple other askSlim tools that you can look at for confirmation of the bias: the Slimulator ranking system is here, shows bearish bias in Nike, and the askSlim momentum tracker is also showing very bearish in Nike. It's right here. So now let's switch over to the chart. This is the weekly chart of Nike. On the bottom, we have a dominant 26 bar cycle, and it is broken into minor half cycles. And these cycle brackets are a drawing tool that help us visualize the money flows into and out of a symbol. The vertical black dotted lines show us where the cycles formed their lows relative to the ideal cycle troughs shown by the cycle brackets. Over here on the right, we have blue vertical dashed lines that show the period of time around the next ideal cycle trough when we would expect the current intermediate cycle in Nike to form a low and begin to move up again into the rising phase of the next cycle. And that period of time runs from February 12th to March 22nd. Notice that our proprietary momentum indicator, the reversal scout that Slim was talking about, turned negative right here after this large bearish candle, rejecting from the 78.6% fib of the previous cycle. Now, our initial target here is at the 78.6% fib of this cycle, and that is around $96. Switching over to the daily chart, you'll see more clearly the weakness that Nike is experiencing. We had a negatively configured previous cycle, meaning that it ended lower than where it began. Then Nike couldn't even get up into the resistance zone in the rising phase of this cycle before breaking down below the cycle low support. So we have created this minor resistance zone using the fib tool on this presumed cycle high and this low. And we've gotten up into that zone today. So we would expect this area to hold and for Nike to move back down into the cycle timing window here, which is projected from February 9th to February 20th. So now that Nike is trading up into this zone, we want to see this area hold and for price to turn back down and give us an entry signal. That would be a momentum continuation to the downside signal down here on the slim ribbon PO and or a return to negative momentum on the 2-hour chart. I personally tend to look for both as confirmations of each other. Now, there are a couple things to pay attention to here. Look at these notes that RV put in. These are important to pay attention to. There was an adjustment to this cycle earlier this month, making it 1 bar shorter on this presumptive low. He also put in a repair level at the current cycle peak. If we got through that level, it would suggest that this is the low of the prior cycle instead of this earlier one. And that would not change our bearish bias. Look what happens if you put these back to the original 26 bars. It lines up perfectly with that low. So as I said, that would not change the bearish bias that we have in here, but it would change the levels where we would look for an entry, and it would push this daily cycle timing period out by about a week. So this is February 26th. It is still syncing up with the weekly cycle timing window when we're looking for that intermediate low. So that's why it's not changing our bias. That intermediate low was from February 12th to March 22nd. This fits within that time frame, and that's why it's on the cycle low timing tracker. So if this is the rising phase off of the low, it is still certainly not impressing us with its strength. So we'll keep an eye on how Nike behaves here. As far as option strategies, Nike currently has a low IV rank that would suggest long premium strategies. So you could buy a put around, I like to use around the 70 delta. You could also look at other strategies such as a put debit spread or even a put zebra for a stock replacement strategy. So I'll be updating our members going forward with regard to an options trade idea in Nike.
All right, thanks, Katie. Let's go ahead and jump over to TOL. We'll look at a short-term short idea, and then I'll hand this off to Matt to look at a long-term, intermediate-term trade idea in Wynn. Okay, so this is the both weekly and daily chart here for TOL. So first thing we have to note in this chart is we're seeing a series of higher cycle highs, higher cycle lows. Okay, so the overall core look here is still bullish. However, we have run quite a ways here on the upside, and we're due to form a higher low flag, and that's really what we are looking for. And then for a bounce off of this zone right here. You can see this zone right here is right around the 9160-ish area to 82.5 in TOL. And then we'll be looking for a bounce off that zone with our next key trough that's only due out in the summer of 2024. If we shift over to the daily time frame, okay, so we are looking for this to fail basically right around here, from 98.45 to 131. And then if it ends up moving through, 102.43, this would be marked as a loser, and we're looking for a move down into this zone from the 38.2 to the 50, 91.49 to 87 even, and a low that is due right around 213 to 229. Keep in mind there is earnings here. We will not have this on, you know, as a short idea going into earnings. This will be pulled prior to that. We don't hold any trade ideas into earnings since anything can happen on earnings, as we have seen. But you can see we have had a really solid move up, formed our low right there, and then we have now lost this low at this area right here. We have traded below it and are just forming this really small little move back on the upside. We're looking for this to turn back down and roll over into the zones that I mentioned. Okay, so that's the look there at TOL, and I'm going to go ahead and hand this off over to you, Matt, for a long idea in Wynn.
Okay, so as RV mentioned, I'll be taking a look here at Wynn Resorts and looking at a, well, let me take a step back. So as traders, we have to wear multiple hats. We have to be able to clearly define a methodology for ourselves, one, and then we have to be able to convert that methodology into technical evidence in the form of analysis. And then we need to be able to also bring that to a place where we say we have a trading plan and we have an edge that we want to act on. So I always like to, whenever I get asked from members about questions around the charts, I always try to frame it into that trade planning context with starting with what's that outlook period. So you saw today when Slim introduced this segment, we have an outlook period. It's very important to know what outlook period that you're looking at because that will drive the time frames that you're using for your information. And then once you have your charts, time frames based on your outlook period, you want to determine your directional bias. So you have to have a methodology that can help you determine directional bias. And then we want to be able to produce key levels. Those would be both our projections as well as our reevaluations that let us know that the analysis that we did is likely changing, and we need to reevaluate that potential position that we have on, whether that would be take it off or lessen it up. And then once you've gone through your analysis, you want to make sure that you actually have a tradable edge. And then from there, what are the signals that suggest that trade setup is a go? And obviously, you want to always make sure that your risk and money management rules are in place. Okay, so that's sort of the framework for it. Now let's look at Wynn here. On the weekly chart, you can see here that we made a cycle low here in towards the end of December, and it came a little bit early. And previously, it was in a negative overall pattern structure here as it came in. However, as I'm looking at this now, this current price action with this early low that formed, there's several positive indications that are generating a overall bullish or long side bias here. First, we're in a rising phase that you can see here still on the weekly cycle, and it is performing fairly well at this time. The momentum indicator is positive at this time. And in terms of the minor weekly cycle structure or pattern structures here, you can see that we've taken out some of these prior highs. So overall, that gives me a further confidence or conviction that at this point, we have a positive shape that is developing in Wynn on this intermediate time frame, and not looking for a real huge move here in terms of upside, but looking for some upside, and I'll get to those levels here in just a second. So that's the weekly chart. Now I'm going to go over to the daily chart, and that's important to look at because we also have positive momentum here. The slim ribbon shifted positive here. It was about 1220 or so, 1218, 1219, and has held that positive overall momentum since. We put a recent cycle low, a bottom in place here in about mid-January, and now are in a new rising phase on the daily cycle as well. So we have rising phases, so we have some alignments going on between the two time frames, which is always important as you're looking at things. So if I line this up with the weekly chart on the left, the daily on the right, you can see that there's alignments that we have right now in terms of that cycle timing. So, I'm pulling together all that technical evidence, and just in the last couple of days, we've got above that 78.6 to further confirmations of bullish indications. And again, there are no certainties. There's only the odds, and all you're trying to do is put that technical evidence together so that you can suggest to yourself that you have an overall edge. All right, so now let's go back and let's look at our projections on the upside. We're looking at over the next 3 to 8 weeks that we would get up into this projection zone up here, first testing that 61.8 intermediate fib around 100.75 and getting up close to about 103 is what I'm looking for at this point. And if we got a breach of that prior cycle low, that would require reevaluation of this projection zone, but not necessarily eliminate the long side bias until I would see a close below the 61.8. This would be especially be the case if we can break out again above this prior cycle peak. We had one breakout in the prior cycle. One more would likely suggest that this low that occurred is a very important basing cycle. So a pullback would then suggest that we shouldn't break down and that we would see then another attempt higher, whether that happens in this cycle or the next one. So that's the overall look there in terms of directional bias, key levels, reevaluation levels, and then you want to be looking for signals that suggest the trade is a go. Now that is up to each one of us to determine what those are. Typically, I like to look for momentum confirmation signals, price breakouts predominantly. So we had that cycle low that occurred, and today you can see the reversal scout just starting to turn up. So that would be an indication that the continuation of this rising phase is likely in motion, and this could be a signal that would suggest a trade is a go. Again, all depends on your trading style, but this would be one that I'd be looking for. And then I would jump down into that shorter duration time frame. See if I can find my multiple time frame grid here that our level 4 members have access to. Essentially, you can plug in any symbol you want. And we have 4 time frames here: weekly, daily, 2 hour, and 15 minute. And this is our dashboard for really getting a quick sense at a glance of our proprietary indicators. And you can see here again, as I pointed out on that daily chart, you can see the reversal scout just turning up, and also on the 2 hour chart. So we'd be looking for these 2 hour chart to continue to show positive momentum. So if there was a pullback and it went neutral and negative in the 2 hour, as long as we stayed positive in the daily and the weekly, those would be some other opportunities to look for that advance was likely continuing. All right, so there is my review of Wynn.